Hi, so today I wanted to go over this idea of permission propagation and what it means in Windows when you're copying a file or folder from one place to another, whether it be on the same partition or whether it be another partition or whether it be a different environment altogether. So again, we have this idea of permission propagation. And the idea is we have a file or folder here. And we'll start out by looking at four scenarios. We'll have a file or folder here where we're looking to take this file, and this is an old file, and we're going to copy it into a new location. We'll call this new file, and we're going to copy it, and we'll see what this means. And then we're going to talk about another example where we're going to take a file or folder and move it from one location to another permanently. Again, we'll call this the old folder, we'll call this the new file, and we'll say we're going to cut here, so this means we're going to move it permanently. And we'll assume that both of these are done on the same partition. This we'll call this NTFS 1. We'll call this NTFS 2. And then we'll take a look at what happens when we copy. Say we have a file that's located here in this old folder, and we have a partition going down the middle here, and we're wanting to copy it to a new folder. And we'll call this NTFS 1. We'll call this NTFS 2. And we'll look and see what happens when we copy a file or folder from one new technology file system to another. What happens to the new file when we copy it? Right? This is the old file. This is the new file. We still got two copies. We'll also look at the same situation when we cut and paste it. So we've got a file here. We'll call this an old file system. We'll call this an old file, and we'll call this one here a new file. And we'll say again, we've got two different partitions going on. We've got a new technology file system, one here, and NTFS 2 here. And we'll talk about what happens when we cut a file and move it here. So we're going to cut here. And lastly, we'll talk about what happens in the final situation where we end up, I'll draw a little line here, what would end up happening altogether if we had a new technology file system here and we copied it from this partition here over to like a FAT32 system. What would happen if we copied or pasted a file or folder here? I'll just use copy or paste, copy or cut, permanently move, that is, a file or folder from a new technology system to like another type of partitioning system, such as a FAT32. Okay, so let's go up and take a look at this. I'm going to use red. If we copy a file from an old file or folder to a new file or folder on the same partition, what's going to end up happening is the new file that we've created, being here, this little dot we'll use to symbolize the new file. Say if this old file system was given read, write, and execute permissions, and this new file in this new folder, it inherits properties that only allows it to execute, let's say. Okay, it can't read or write. Well, then what's going to end up happening is when we copy from one location to another location on the same partition, right? What happens is this new file inherits the properties and the permissions of this new folder. So this file here can only execute. Now this original file can still read, write, and execute because we haven't done anything to it, okay? But this new file here can only execute, and that's just a rule you're going to have to memorize. When we copy a file from one location to another on the same partition, the new file inherits the properties and permissions of the new file or folder that it's currently in. Okay, so that's our first case. We'll call this case up here case 1. Case 2 is when we cut and paste. So what ends up happening when we cut and paste on the same partition, say we cut from an old folder and we move this here, actually we move this here, file here, we move this, okay? We move this here and we move it to a new folder. Well, then what ends up happening is we end up, if this folder here was only capable of say writing and executing, and this one here was capable of reading and executing, well, this new file or folder, and this new file, when it's transferred to this new folder, is going to keep the same properties that it had when it was in the original folder. So it works opposite to scenario 1. When we cut and paste a file on the same partition, which we're doing right here, this is the same partition, then it keeps original permissions. In the old folder. Now take a look at this third scenario here. Scenario 3. Now we're copying, but we're copying from one partition to another, and both of these partitions are new technology file systems, okay? And in that case, what ends up happening is the original copy, say this original copy here was capable of being executed only, right? And this new copy that we've created is capable of being read, written, and executed. Well, when we copy from one file system to another, if they're both NTFS, what's going to end up happening is this new file is going to inherit the permissions from the new folder that it's in. Now, this original file still only be able to be executed, but this new file will be able to be read, written, and executed, and it will inherit the permissions from the new folder that it's currently in. Okay? Now, you could probably imagine the same thing for this fourth scenario. The only thing we're doing different this time is we're permanently moving. Okay? We're cutting from one file or folder to another on a different partition. So here we have a new technology file system here, and we're moving to another new technology file system. They're both new technology file system partitions, but they're two separate. So this one here is a C, and then this one here is a D, okay? So when we do that, what ends up happening is we're moving one file, we'll move this one file permanently to this new folder. And when that happens, this new file that's been moved to this new location, once again, it inherits the properties of the new folder it's in. So again, if this folder here was only able to be read, and this folder over here was only able to be executed, well, then this file over here is only going to be able to be executed. It's not going to be able to be read because it's going to inherit the properties of the new folder that it's in. Okay. Now let's take a look at this final step here. This one where we go from a new technology file system to a different type of partitioning. You'll realize that FAT32 is a totally different type of file system than new technology file systems. For example, in NTFS, we're able to do things like encryption. We're able to adjust the size of our clusters. We can do disk quota. We can compress files. In FAT32, file allocation table 32, you can't do any of that. You can obviously have some generous sized clusters, but you can't do things like encryption or compression. So if we were to encrypt a file over a new technology file system, or we were able to assign permissions to it, such as being able to read, write, or execute, what would end up happening if we moved that file or copied it? If we copied it, the original obviously would stay the same, but if we cut it and we permanently moved it to the FAT32 system, then what ends up happening is nothing, meaning no permissions or attributes are carried over. That is to say, nothing is kept from the new technology file system. So that's one of the things you may want to look at if you've got something that you have encrypted on on a specific partition on your computer, and you go to move it. You want to put it onto a USB drive, or maybe it's a external hard drive. You've got to realize, and a lot of times Windows will prompt you, but you got to realize that if that's an encrypted file, when you move it from a new technology file system to an external drive, that file will no longer be encrypted. Now, of course, if you move the file from the external drive to a new technology file system, and you've got encryption enabled, like EFS or BitLocker enabled for NTFS on an NTFS system, then that file, this incoming file would be encrypted. But in terms of taking a file from a new technology file system and assigning permissions and having it encrypted and having it to where those characteristics somehow could be encrypted and move when you transfer the file over, that kind of thing is not going to happen when you move from one file or folder from another to a new location, such as on a FAT32 system. So hope this helps. Hope this clears some things up for you in terms of permission propagation. And these are just 5 different scenarios that you want to remember anytime you're assigning permissions or updating user accounts or any of that stuff. So hope this video helps. Subscribe, and look forward to talking with you on my next one.